Welcome to the Wildy West, a podcast dedicated to being the voice for wild horses. My name is Chase McGorran, and I'll be your host. Let's save these horses together. All I ask you to do is listen. Wild horses evolved on the North American continent some 55 million years ago, making them a native species. Many scientists believe they became extinct here after the Ice Age, only to return centuries later with the Spanish explorers, making them a reintroduced native species. They adapted quickly and continue to thrive and survive if left alone. Wild horses are remarkably resilient, able to survive in the harshest of environments, and in the process, they actually help other species as well. In last week's episode, we began talking about the incredible resilience of wild horses, from digging wells in the barren sands of Sable Island to surviving the unforgiving winters in the foothills of Alberta's Rocky Mountains. This week, we are going to continue that conversation. Please welcome back my guest from last week, Sandy Sharkey, a wild horse photographer, rescuer, and tireless wildy advocate in the fight to protect these magnificent horses and their right to remain living free on the eastern slopes of the Rocky Mountains. Her career has taken her all over the world, where she has had the privilege of spending time with and photographing wild horses. She has taken pictures of the Kaimanawa wild horses of New Zealand, the Gorano wild horses of Portugal, and the wild Przewalski's horses of Mongolia. Her photos have graced the cover of the Canadian Geographic magazine, and some even adorn the walls of private collectors who have been moved by her wild horse photography. Sandy also worked for 25 years as a radio announcer, and now uses her skills to host tourists from around the world, including the United Kingdom, Australia, and the United States, helping them experience the thrill of Alberta mountain horses in their natural habitat. I understand that the Sable Island horses dig for fresh drinking water. Oh, sorry, I didn't read the question. We already spoke about how they dig for the fresh drinking water. So let's move on. And in a similar fashion, I understand Alberta's mountain horses dig through snow for forage, and they break thin ice for drinking water. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. Horses have the innate instinct to dig for whatever it is they need, whether it's food or water. In the case of the Alberta mountain horses, they are going to have water sources, obviously a lot more readily to them than the Sable Island wild horses, but they live in an environment in a wilderness area of the Rocky Mountain foothills that has a number of creeks, rivers, lakes. So they will go to their favorite creeks, and what they might now face is a layer of ice. So I have seen Alberta mountain horses just ram their heavy hooves into ice. It doesn't take long for them to break it up. And so they don't have any problem doing that. And I've also seen Alberta mountain horses who are going to face a heck of a lot more snow than the Sable Island horses, sometimes, 2-3 feet deep. They just instinctively go to areas where the snow isn't going to be as deep, including areas that are around thicker forests where, just because of the thickness of those forests, the snow doesn't have the ability to accumulate as much. And they'll forage in there. Or they'll on steeper areas. I've seen Alberta mountain horses dig through snow on steep slopes, because a steeper slope isn't going to have the accumulation of snow as opposed to flatter areas. So they're smart. They go up there. I mean, when you see some of the Alberta mountain horses and some of the crazy steep hills they're on, and they're so fine up there, and they're digging through their snow. I've got lots of photographs of lots of Alberta mountain horses just congregating in these areas. And, by the time they're done a big feeding session, it's almost like spring. There's no snow anymore, because they're just digging through it all. But yeah, they always have a way. They do. They have a way. They have instinct. They have knowledge. They have hundreds of years of honing these instincts, and they're built to survive. They're built to rise up against any kind of adversity that Mother Nature throws at them.
How does the Sable Island horses digging for water or the Alberta mountain horses digging for forage and breaking ice for water help other wildlife?
So, in terms of Sable Island, the only mammals on Sable Island are the horses and the gray seals. The relationship between the horses and the gray seals is a little bit different. Well, it's very much different in terms of species benefiting other species. And on Sable Island, it's actually the reverse, where the gray seals, which are in huge numbers in December, January, and early February, they are the largest breeding colony of gray seals in the world. The island, at 42 kilometers long and 1.2 kilometers wide, is covered in gray seals during that time because of breeding season. So those seals, and by giving birth, obviously Mother Nature does take some of the seals at that time. It can be a harsh time. The nutrition that's left behind because of having those many seals through their defecation, through seals perishing, etc., actually provides very important nutrients for the grass on Sable Island, which in turn helps the horses. So there's a very symbiotic relationship between the gray seals and the wild horses of Sable Island. And so it kind of goes in a bit of reverse that way to your question. When you get into Alberta, the wild horses that exist, the 15 to 1700, that work perfectly in tandem with the biodiversity, with the predators, and with the other herbivores, the deer, the elk, fox, coyote, martens, ermines, weasels. Like, we can go all the way down and all the way up to the top predators. So when they're digging for water, all the other animals are benefiting from that as well. And there's so much biodiversity and so many species in the Alberta wilderness that all work in tandem. And when the horses, who are one of the larger animals, are able to uncover areas of forage with, just through their strength in their legs and their hooves, or water sources, it is going to benefit all the wildlife, right to the birds too.
Can you tell us why the Sable Island horses do not require human intervention to manage their population?
Because as much as people want to think that this is a fallacy, the people that think this is a fallacy, when we say that Mother Nature takes care of wild horses, all you really have to do is think about, we haven't been this destructive for that long. Like, human beings, if you think about, the past 100 years, and you think about some of the advances, or if you call them advances, and the destruction that we have wielded against natural spaces, there was a time when natural spaces ruled and wildlife was completely regulated by Mother Nature through, you know, weather, through amount of forage, through prey predator balances, like the entire mix of things that Mother Nature ensures has a healthy balance in terms of wildlife. And if the survival of the fittest is going to be in place, which it should always be, without intervention from mankind. So it's somewhere along the line, not putting this very clearly, but somewhere along the line, mankind decided that wildlife couldn't exist without its help. Now, when you think about the pressures that mankind has put on wild spaces and wildlife, I guess you could kind of say, okay, I see your point, because we keep growing and we keep growing, and our communities are growing and our cities are growing, and we're taking away their space. So when you start to take away their space, then their numbers start to obviously reflect that. And so, when humans are encroaching on wildlife, then they feel that they have to start managing the wildlife. And that is true in many areas, because if you're building a city and you haven't given thought to wildlife corridors or things like that are important for the wildlife within, these people start eliminating the wildlife. So in the Alberta Rocky Mountain foothills, where the Alberta mountain horses live, there's a ridiculous amount of wilderness for those horses. It's 2 million acres.
Yeah.
So when you think about 1,700 horses over 2 million acres, it's pretty crazy to think about them as being too high in number. So it's all smoke and mirrors. It's all a narrative to try to convince the public that there are too many of them. Too many horses? It doesn't even make any sense. But when they talk about things like, the numbers being too high, it's all in deference to the people that profit from public lands. So, the prey predator balance in Alberta in the wilderness is bang on. And so we don't have to be a part of it whatsoever. We just have to let nature do what nature does.
Absolutely. I've heard a couple of Indigenous people say that Mother Nature will take care of it and humans don't have to, right? If something's wrong, Mother Nature
Yep,
will do it, right? So,
exactly.
can you tell us why Alberta's mountain horses do not require population management at this time?
Well, because of the fact that there are so few in the first place, we talked about the numbers 1,500 to 1,700 that have basically remained in that area for years and years and years, and without intervention from mankind. Although, I do hear stories about the horses being removed unscrupulously under the dark of night and things like that. Unfortunately, that happens.
Mm-hmm.
But no, it's just inane to think that there are too many horses. There aren't. In fact, they are always at risk of um, you know being so few in number that you lose the genetic diversity, which is obviously very important.
Mm-hmm.
And they need to the public needs to understand how few there are. And so when the minister, Todd Lowen of Forestry and Parks, talks about the fact that there are too many wild horses and people believe that, they need to dig a little bit deeper and hopefully open their ears and their eyes to the actual truth, which is our job as advocates to get the truth out, to understand that there's 15 to 1,700 Alberta mountain horses on over 2 million acres of public land. So, how can that be too many horses?
Well, even since I've been going to college, there have been multiple people because, people find out at the college that I'm doing this podcast. And so they go, and I've had multiple people come up and, tell me false things about things that are on the government's website, right? Saying they have no natural predators. And I find myself constantly correcting these people and just going, no, it just takes a little bit of research. Just because you heard it once doesn't mean it's true. You need to do research on them because they're not invasive. They don't hurt anything. And yeah, it's frustrating constantly having to correct people and going, no, that's not right.
Before I became a wild horse advocate, I was so naive that I believed everything the government told me. Well, it's the government, so therefore it must be right. And then they'll also trot out their science to back something up. When I became a wild horse advocate, I started to realize that you can't take what the government says at face value all the time. And in fact, when they trot out science, where did the science come from? So they fund people to go to school to come out of those classes with degrees to further the narrative from the Alberta government. So, in other words, there will be people that will be funded to go to university to become rangeland specialists. And when the Alberta government is paying you to be that, when you finally graduate, then there's an expectation that you're going to be aligned with the Alberta government's wishes in terms of finding some kind of proof that, for example, the Alberta mountain horses are hurting the environment by over grazing. So they're going to trot that out. So I learned that we really all have to dig deeper into the layers. You can't just take the government's word for it. I know Todd Lowen has absolutely maintained his position. He keeps repeating the same things over and over again with a very false narrative. And I understand that the public who has busy lives and kids and jobs and mortgages and all that stuff, if they hear Todd Loewen in an interview saying that there's too many wild horses, there's a really good chance that the public is going to say, wow, that's too bad. It's too bad there's so many of them. And I guess the government knows what they're doing. And then they buy it. They just buy it. They buy what the government is saying. So I can point you to a pretty cool thing that happened actually to me. I think it was just last year. Yeah, it was last year. It was the month of March. I was in the Alberta wilderness. I had some friends with me, and we were driving through a wild horse area. It was pretty remote. There was snow everywhere. Obviously, it was winter, and we saw a band of wild horses down in a valley, and we were on a road that was kind of elevated. So we pulled over and we just started enjoying the horses, watching them. I did have a long lens with me, and I started taking some photos. And a truck pulled up, and they rolled down their window and they said, "Hey, what are you guys doing?" And we said, "Oh, we're taking photos of the horses, enjoying these wild horses down here." And they said, "Oh, the horses, oh, there's way too many of them." And so I walked over to the truck and I stood beside the passenger door, and the window was down, of course. And there's two guys in the vehicle. And I said, "Just wondering why you're saying that." He said, "Oh, well, we heard Todd Loewen on the radio the other day." And these guys said, "We're hunters, and we don't mind the horses at all. Actually, we like seeing them, and we have no problem with them at all. But if there's too many of them, that means that they're going to take the forage away from the elk and the deer, and So I said, "Okay, how many horses are there?" And the guy in the passenger seat said, "Oh, I don't know, 40,000." And then the drivers, "Oh, there's not that many. I think there's something like 25,000." And then I just looked at them and I said, "There are 1,578 Alberta mountain horses." And they both went, "What?"
Yeah.
And it was such a great moment. It was such a great moment because they were really cool. And they were very, very open-minded and listened, because I then went on for about 10 more minutes to talk about the false narrative that the Alberta government, particularly Todd Loewen, keeps spewing out to the public. And they just took it all in, and they thanked me at the end, and they drove off saying that they were going to tell others about what I had just said to them. And it was like a brilliant moment. And I turned around, and my friend videotapes everything. She videotapes her food, her lunch.
Yeah.
And I said, "Did you get any of that?" They're like, "No." I said, "Oh, man." I mean, it would have been the most amazing thing to put on social media, because it was just classic. It was just a great, great experience.
I feel like the longer I do this, the more I feel like, like kind of like a conspiracy theorist, right? Where it's like, no, the government's lying to you, but like they kind of
They do.
are. They do. So
Yeah.
it makes me feel like I'm being gaslighted or something, just trying to fight for these horses, because so many people are like, "Oh, that's not true. The government wouldn't lie." And it's like, I mean, historically they have, and they currently are. So there's not a whole lot that we can do to stop feeling crazy. Alrighty. Well, my last two questions I ask every single guest. I think I've asked you before. And they're always the same two questions. So we'll start with the first one. Why should people care about Alberta's wild mountain horses?
Why should people care about anything? Why should people have compassion? Why should people have humanity? Why should people, even if they have never, ever, ever seen Alberta mountain horses or wild horses at all, ever, still care? Because if we stop caring about wildlife and wild spaces, we lose everything.
Yeah, we lose those wild spaces if we stop caring, right? Right on. And for the final question, what can listeners do to help?
Stay informed is the most important thing. So follow advocates that are doing good work, and are putting out specific calls to action that you can do from, the comfort of your home and your chair and your computer. Sometimes it's as easy as just making one click on your mouse to add your name to something. Other times we ask that you write letters, make phone calls. There are various advocate groups to follow, but the number one advocate group for the protection and the future of these horses by far is Help Alberta Wildies Society. They have a Facebook page that has, I believe there are 700,000 followers around the world. So please follow them, because you're never going to be steered wrong, and you're going to get all the information that you need all the time regarding who to write to, what to say even. They will help you with your messaging. Obviously, Todd Lowen is the number one person to write to. And the most important thing right now, too, is not only to be a participant in this, and not to just be someone who thinks it's a sad thing what's happening and just walks away. Like, please take the 1 minute it will take you to add your name and add your voice to something. Because the more people that share the truth and keep the story out front, the more likelihood that there will be a day that the Alberta Mountain Horse will finally be there in peace, not to be removed by the government and false narratives, and will be given the designation of naturalized species. And because the horses are under the file of the provincial government, the Alberta government in itself will tend to only acknowledge the voices of Albertans. Now, does that mean that if you don't live in Alberta that you shouldn't care or be a part of calls to action? Not at all. Continue to do it, because it gets to a point where it will be so overwhelming. And when you share and you see something on social media, say a post from Help Alberta Wildies Society, and you share it, and you don't live in Alberta, there's a really good chance that eventually it's going to get to an Albertan who will pick up that phone and write letters. And so it doesn't matter where you live. Keep your passion and your compassion towards these animals, and let's right this wrong, and let's get more Albertans to add their voices to these beautiful provincial gems that only live in Alberta and nowhere else in the world. Very unique horses.
And I guess going off of that, I know most of what people can do is for Canadians or Albertans, but is there anything international listeners can do to help other than just sharing the posts and getting the word out there? Is there anything else they could really do, or is it?
One of the things that we're focusing on more, I alluded to it earlier, is actually keeping data related to how much money people are spending when they come to Alberta, to specifically come to Alberta to see the Alberta mountain horses. So people from around the world who are intending to come to Alberta and see the horses, to write letters and let Todd Lowen know that the only reason that they're in Alberta is because of these horses, and here's how much money we spent. So that's one way they can help. Of course, sharing, we've been talking about that, but you can't overemphasize how important it is to share information. The fact that it all started, it started very small. Like in 2015 was the last official attempt at removing wild horses by the Alberta government. And they've been quiet for years. And now it's the ugly talk about removals is rearing its ugly head again. But they were quiet for years. And one of the reasons they were quiet for years is because there was started to become a ground swell of people starting to grow in numbers, that were starting to understand that these horses are there, love the horses, come to visit the horses. So the horses were starting to build up and build up and build up in beautiful ways, and people finding out that they exist and all of that. And I think that what happened was it got to a point where the people that are the detractors who want the wild horses gone were starting to get really scared about how many people were loving these horses, and how popular they were becoming and how well known they were starting to become. So they started to put pressure on Todd Lowen to start, having them removed. Never mind, the craziness of how few numbers there are. But as international people, they can certainly help in ways like that. And just keep sharing. share that, why have there been so many international film crews here, this year in Alberta? And it's because of the sharing. And anytime a documentary comes out highlighting the beauty of these horses, that is essentially free marketing for Alberta tourism, so it's time that they acknowledge these horses, and they acknowledge that they are a gem that are adored around the world, and they actually start to put them in their brochures as part of the beauty of Alberta.
Thank you so much for your time today, Sandy.
Thank you, Chase. Thank you for doing this. Thank you for doing a huge part in sharing the stories of wild horses, and hopefully one day in my lifetime, I don't know how many years I have left, I will see that designation come through for naturalized species for the Alberta mountain horses. And it'll be thanks to people like you. So thank you very much for doing this.
Of course, hopefully we can get the word out to as many people as possible.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode, part 2 of this season's first interview with Sandy Sharkey. The amount of support we have received from you has really meant a lot, and it brings us closer to seeing these beautiful animals saved. A huge thank you to Sandy and everyone else that I was lucky enough to sit down with and interview this season. If you want to help, there are a ton of different things you can do. If you live in Canada, you can write to your local member of parliament or directly to the Minister of Parks in Alberta. If you aren't as comfortable doing that, or you don't live in Canada, you may wish to follow the Help Alberta Wildlife Society or HAWS on Facebook to get more involved and see what other things you can do. There is also the Alberta Mountain Horse Preservation Society on Facebook that you might also want to go check out. See what they're doing to help. The information for both of these groups can be found in the show notes for this episode. And if you haven't already, I highly recommend giving them a follow. And of course, every like and comment means a lot. And clicking subscribe on YouTube as well as the little notification bell will do even more to help us out. Every little bit truly does help, and it allows me to show tangible proof that people care. If you'd be so kind as to share this with friends or family that you think might be interested in this topic, or who you think would want to help, I would really appreciate it. If you want to follow us on social media, you can find us on Twitter, Facebook, and Blue Sky using the tag @TheWildyWest. For any business inquiries, please contact us at thewildywest@gmail.com. I'm your host, Chase McGoran. Thank you once again for listening to The Wildy West.